Hey, everybody, welcome to the Football Guys Power Grid. Sigmund Bloom here. Cecil Lammy is on assignment, always on assignment, giving us everything that we need to cover setting our DFS lineups all week. We have the All-Stars here, John Lee, Austin Lee, Devin Knotts, Jeff Pasquino. Special guest this week, other than me, of course, Phil Alexander. Welcome, everybody. Before we jump in, I'm going to give you a special note from FanDuel. This week, you can get in a free fantasy basketball contest. You can win a trip to Brooklyn. We live in Brooklyn, baby. We go into Brooklyn, you and a friend, or it could be someone closer than a friend, a confidant, even a partner. You'll be sitting courtside with Brandon freaking Marshall. Yeah, Brandon Marshall. Watch Golden State take on Brooklyn, courtside, travel and airfare included. Who wouldn't want to go to Brooklyn right now? Go to FanDuel.com/footballguys to play now, getting this free fantasy basketball contest. And you're going to get a lot of great advice here on this week's FanDuel all DFS slate with our All-Stars. So we jump in to the Week 10 slate. And let's go ahead and start with Atlanta at Philadelphia. And, of course, we're always looking for games with that potential to push the ceilings up for players, maybe bring some players into consideration that we wouldn't. Phil, I'll start with you. Looking at Atlanta and Philadelphia, what are the storylines here that you are drawn to when you're setting your lineups?
Well, this is a homecoming for Matt Ryan, right? And I guess that's one of the narratives. But I think that Matt Ryan might be set up for failure this week. I mean, he's been one of the more consistent quarterbacks, really across DFS, one of the bigger surprises. But his schedule recently, his last four, Tampa, New Orleans, Oakland, Carolina, not exactly top-notch pass defenses. This week he's on the road. He's in Philly. That's the number one pass defense, according to DVOA. And, they're a bottom third defense in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. No one's passed on them at home yet, including Ben Roethlisberger. I'm looking for Matt Ryan to hit the skids a little bit, not using him in cash games. Might use him a little bit in GPPs because I think Julio could probably get over on those cornerbacks, and that could result in some big plays. But as far as Matt Ryan goes, I think I'm out this week.
It's going to be really interesting to watch this because Atlanta has turned into Kyle Shanahan. Where's he going to be a coach next year? They're a multiple offense a la Bill Belichick's Patriots. And in every tough road matchup they've had against Denver, they found that Tevin Coleman matchup. Against Seattle, they were able to get tight ends open. We'll see. And Eli Manning did have the best game of the year for him last week against Philly, but not at home. As you said, Philly at home, Philly on the road. Very different. Devin, let's talk about a matchup that always makes me tingly because I'm a Steelers fan, and it makes me think of the 70s Super Bowls, but Cecil brought up the 90s Super Bowl. I got to see the game in 2004 in person. Dallas at Pittsburgh. This has been an epic matchup in NFL history, Devin. What can it produce epically for our DFS lineups?
Yeah, the question is how healthy Ben Roethlisberger is after he played last week. He didn't look – as you're a Steelers fan, I think you can agree.
Oh, yeah.
Traditional Ben Roethlisberger. If he's 90%, I love it. I mean, he's a guy who is going to throw the ball enough, and he's going to make that entire offense viable against that. They're not. Dallas's defense is not a favorable matchup, but it's not an unfavorable matchup, and we all know Ben Roethlisberger at home is a different player. So I will definitely have some shares of him. I will have some shares of Brown, and I will have some shares of Bell as well. I think the offense looks to get back on track. It's a must-win game for Pittsburgh. They're, from a playoff perspective, they can't keep losing games. So I think the offense finds themselves at home.
And I do think that we're just seeing how much healthier Roethlisberger can get here. Also, with Ezekiel Elliott. All of a sudden, the Steelers' run defense came on. Dallas missing Barry Church and Morris Claiborne. Another matchup that brings to mind epic plays, or maybe epic plays that didn't happen, John, when Marshawn Lynch did not get the ball at the goal line. Seattle and New England. This is a primetime matchup everyone can tune in for. When they tune in, John, what is going to be relevant for our DFS lineups?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game, Sig. This Seattle Seahawks defense is really tough to gauge this year. If we look at what they've done over the past few weeks, I think over the past month, I'm pulling it up right now, they've given up 24 points against Atlanta, which I think is respectable. And then they held Arizona to a pair of field goals back in Week 7. And in the past 2 weeks to New Orleans and Buffalo, they've allowed 25 points. With that in mind, that's 24 or more points in 3 of the past 4 games. And then now they have to travel to New England on a short week. The folks in Vegas don't think this is going to set up real well for them. New England's team total right now is over 4 touchdowns, 28.5 points. I think this is a situation where we can look to Tom Brady to do his thing. Seeing on Twitter today, there are reports coming out of Foxborough that Dion Lewis will make his return this week. He is interesting GPP fodder. This is probably a week where I think you want to stay away from that Seattle defense. And, dare I say we go with the Gisele Bundchen special, that being naked Tom Brady this week in GPP formats.
Tom Brady with Uggs on. All right.
You guys like that?
I like that. I think that's we want to add that to the lexicon for sure. Audible history being made as you're watching tonight. And I think that with Seattle, one of the things that's interesting to bring up is that teams have been running successfully on them. Even in that 6-6 game, you saw David Johnson. It wasn't a great as far as efficiency, but teams running well against them. New Orleans running game came back alive. Buffalo's running game, outstanding production against them. Maybe it's a LeGarrette Blount game. Also, and Seattle's vulnerable to tight ends. Levi Toilolo, the joke I make is that his touchdown had to be time with a sundial against them. Bennett and Gronkowski, if they forget about them the way they forgot about Toilolo, they're going to hurt them. So I think that there's definitely some strengths of the New England offense that match up well with the Seattle defense. Austin, let's talk about a game where maybe the strengths are on defense and potentially because Kansas City might be missing Jeremy Maclin, Spencer Ware coming back from a concussion, but having to face that tough Carolina front seven, you might be inclined to test the secondary more, but it's Alex Smith of the pop gun arm and mind. How do these injuries affect our outlook for the Kansas City Carolina game? Is there anywhere we can go with this one?
Yeah, I think the place you go on the Kansas City side is turning to Travis Kelce here. I think that you don't really want to try to count on these other wide receivers with Alex Smith throwing them the ball and with Jeremy Maclin out. So that's the one glimmer of hope in the Kansas City offense. I would not head towards their running game because Carolina's rush defense is their strength. I think that Cam Newton, though, could be a decent tournament play this week. But really, I'm kind of saving Cam Newton for next week when he faces New Orleans. I think that's really when he busts out. But we'll have a little bit of exposure to Cam this week in GPPs.
Yeah, Cam Newton, the riddle, as he was a high-scoring quarterback with Denver and Minnesota on the schedule. And then the last 2 weeks, nothing. So I think of when I think of Carolina versus Kansas City, I think of offensive futility.
Yeah.
So we'll see how this one goes. Let's go to Vegas. Let's take this around the horn, and we'll go in opposite order. You know, we look at Vegas. Sometimes that gives us that first clue for what to expect. Awesome. When you look at the information, the data coming out of the desert this week, what thoughts pop into your head?
Well, I think you've got two really highly favored teams top with implied totals, New England and Arizona. They're the only two teams that are favored by more than 4 points on the main slate. So I think you're going to see a lot of close games. And if you see any of these totals that look like, hey, this could get to shootout territory because it's close, I think those are the games you want to lean heavily into that game script. But I think a lot of people are going to be all over the New England players and the Arizona players this week.
Yeah, play everybody against San Francisco. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I forgot. Before we jump into this, I have to go toss this to Jeff Pasquino because he's got some very important information for us on how we approach this week. The 16 bye weeks are over, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.
14. Sorry, I didn't forget about you, Jeff. I'm sorry. I'm just building the drama. I'm building the suspense to this because this is important. No, there's 4 teams on bye this week, and then when you add in the Thursday night game, it adds 2 more teams that takes us out of consideration for our Sunday slates. So how will that change our approach to certain positions this week?
Yeah, normally we don't talk too much about the bye weeks in the Thursday game because we're recording Thursday night. So everybody's going to be watching this on Friday and the weekend. So it's important, though, this week to talk about it because of the teams that are actually off, because it impacts who we're choosing. So we losing Detroit. There goes the pick the tight end against Detroit theory. So that's gone. We've lost Cleveland because they're playing Thursday. The Colts, who you can start everyone against, they're gone. So now you really need to dig a little deeper into the stats. And this is actually a good week to do that because a lot of DFS players are going to be scratching their heads because now they don't know what to do at tight end. Now they don't know what running backs to automatically plug in. So, and the Cleveland defense isn't there to exploit. So this is a great time to do more research, and Football Guys is perfect spot for you to do your research with all the articles we have on Friday and Saturday that pop up for DFS.
You can only put so many Arizona players in your lineup. It's a law, actually. There's a cap on how many you can put in. So you got to fill up those other spots. Okay, Jeff, I'll toss it back to you for Vegas. So when we're filling those other spots, other than our Arizona Cardinals, what does Vegas lead us to?
Well, it's great that Austin brings up how many close games that there are, because there are a lot. And I think that you've got some potential shootouts. You've got a couple over-unders that are right at that tipping point of 50 points. You've got Philadelphia, Atlanta, everybody's going to be looking at it. It's just a matter of how you're going to exploit that. And I think we're going to get into that. I think the San Diego-Miami game is interesting for a high total, but the one I really like is Green Bay, Tennessee. I think that's really interesting. A lot of people are going to not be looking at Tennessee at all. I think that Mariota is going to have a great game. He's had 10 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. And Rashard Matthews is a nice sleeper. But Tennessee is going to put up a lot of points against Green Bay, and it's probably going to be through the air because Green Bay is pretty strong against the run.
Yeah, and as Marcus Mariota is asked to do more, defensive touchdowns can follow. Ask San Diego. So maybe even on the road, Green Bay lays an egg at home. Maybe they come on strong on the road this week. Look over home, road, overs, unders, and everything else kind of Vegas. John, this week, what stands out?
Yeah, there are a couple things that stand out to me, but the one that I think I'll bring up in this segment is the Chicago Bears this week. Their team total is 24 points. Jay Cutler looked pretty decent in his return last week, and I think that DFS, the sites have not yet caught up to the pricing that should be in line with these Chicago skill players this week. As I look at the Bears, there are quite a few of them who are underpriced for what we should expect based on this team total. So Jay Cutler, we'll get into a lot of these players, but Jay Cutler, Alshon Jeffrey, Cam Meredith, even Zach Miller and Jordan Howard. These guys all look like they're in play this week in a variety of formats, and you certainly are going to have some exposure to them against Tampa Bay, and hopefully throughout the show we'll be able to point you in the right direction as to whom has the best matchups and where you can exploit those angles.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, a defense that has given up 43, 30. Okay, they hold down Derek Anderson and Colin Kaepernick and Paxton Lynch and Travis Simeon, but LA scored 37 on them. Arizona scored 40 on them. And Jay Cutler could be a little bit of a sleeping, maybe not a sleeping giant, but certainly not a quarterback of small stature for DFS this week, because his only two full games were against Houston and Minnesota, two of the tougher defenses. We're not quite sure what he can do, certainly in a very positive matchup. Devin, positive matchups, negative matchups. When you look over Vegas this week, what do you see?
Yeah, the game or the team that I'm targeting is New Orleans. Projected to score right around 26.5 points. And Aqib Talib is looking more and more unlikely to play. This sets up really well for Drew Brees and pick one of the receivers, especially in GPPs. We'll get into receivers in a little bit, but I think that as Talib and as that entire secondary really is not 100% healthy, there could be some great passing opportunity for the Saints this week.
And rushing opportunity. I think Oakland showed something kind of like the water getting through the cracks in the dam that other teams are going to emulate now. And New Orleans, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, want to run and run and run and run. We may see one of those run to set up the pass games this week. I think Derek Wolfe is also out for Denver. So Denver's a team that could be in crisis. And Trevor Siemian, who I believe Cecil told me was leading the league in 3 and outs. 3 and outs with a team that can't get defense off the field against the run in the Superdome could be nightmarish. What nightmares, what dreams do you see getting fulfilled this week in Vegas, Phil?
Well, I would agree with everything that everybody laid out there so far. And just to piggyback on what Jeff was saying about Green Bay and Tennessee, I think that DeMarco Murray is going to get overlooked this week. And his price is down $700 on both major sites, which is pretty crazy, seeing as how he's coming off a 17.5-point game, which is right around his average. I guess that might be due to the Green Bay run defense, but they're not impervious. I mean, 2 touchdowns led up to Frank Gore last week. Ezekiel Elliott ran all over them recently. And Murray just accounts for so much of that offense. But just to give one original take, I guess I'm looking at San Diego at home against Miami, 25.5-point implied total from Vegas. And to state the obvious, Melvin Gordon is a great play as usual. I mean, if they're projected to go over 3 touchdowns, Melvin Gordon is accounting for, I think, something like 42% of their total touchdowns this season. I mean, it seems like he's a lock to get in at least once, and he's been running great. He's been involved as a receiver. I'm sure he's the chalk this week because he's still slightly underpriced compared to the other top running backs, but he belongs in lineups in every format.
Yeah, it looks. I look at this matchup and I think of the head coach is picking up like Jay Ajayi and Melvin Gordon by the ankles and just swinging them, pounding away at each other with these 2 running backs. The attitude of these teams, the attitude of these running backs right now. But hey, Antonio Gates is only halfway to the 8 touchdowns he needs to pass Tony Gonzalez. So there's a guy with a good chance to get a touchdown. And then of course Tyrell Williams, who's been under the radar playing very well. We want to put some quarterbacks on the radar, on the DFS radar this week. Of course, we're always looking at these from, speaking of chalk. And I don't know which running back's chalkier this week between Gordon and Johnson, but certainly those are the 2. When we go to quarterbacks, we're looking at chalk plays. We're looking at cash versus GPP, who we're fading as we look over the quarterback position. Austin, give us your hot quarterback takes.
I believe that if you're going to pay up for a quarterback, you're going to see a lot of Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady in cash game lineups. I think that Matt Ryan is a guy you should fade at the top and choose one of those 2 guys instead. I'm more on Brady than Rodgers. He's a little bit cheaper, but both are solid plays here. If you're going to go on the cheap side of things, I'm looking at guys like Carson Palmer's a little cheaper. He's like mid-range. I think everyone's going to be focused on David Johnson, and I could see Carson Palmer having a strong game against San Francisco this week.
Jeff, quarterbacks this week. What stands out is, it's Austin said, there's Brady, there's Rodgers, but there's a lot more complexity the farther down we go. Put under the microscope. Tell us what you see.
Well, I'm looking at that Philly Atlanta game because I see a lot of talent there at the receiver position. Atlanta is giving up 14 touchdowns to wide receivers for the second most. Atlanta's given up 26 or more points in 8 of the 9 contests. So it's going to be a ton of points. So I think Sproles is a good play this week. I think Ertz is a good play this week. I think Jordan Matthews is good this week. So put that all together, and the focal point is Carson Wentz. And he's going to be distributing the ball, and I think he's a great quarterback play to get in your lineup this week. I also like Marcus Mariota. Well, okay, I can't wait to hear that, Austin. But I like Marcus Mariota as well into the Tennessee game. And I think that just to build on what was said about Green Bay run defense, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But I think that Marcus Mariota is a great play this week. He's had 10 touchdowns in the last 4 games. I think that he's a solid option in the lower tier this week.
Yeah, and going back to what you were going to say, when you're I know getting a little off tangent here with Darren Sproles, but Atlanta really has trouble corralling running backs out of the backfield as receivers. I think they've given up 3 receiving touchdowns to running backs already in most games. I think all except one. I think it was Green Bay when they had Don Jackson, the Don Jackson Nile Davis special. Otherwise, you tend to see Atlanta give up a lot of receptions to running backs. It's shaping up to be a Darren Sproles week this week in what could be a very high-scoring game. John, we look at quarterbacks, and again, Rodgers, Brady, Palmer is a great name to bring up because, hey, start everyone against San Francisco. If you're looking to maybe zig where other people are zagging, what does the zig look like, John?
Yeah, so the ZIG this week, it'll be interesting to see what happens with some of the early numbers that we get from other sites. We have a couple projecting ownership pieces on the sites, and we try to inform our subscribers as much as possible with regards to where we think ownership is going to fall. The one that I'm interested in is Drew Brees against that Denver defense. He's playing at home, and we know that Denver has a very good pass defense. But as somebody's already pointed out, Aqib Talib looks like he won't be playing again. And I think a lot of people know that they can be run on, as you brought up, Sig. But if I'm taking a GPP flyer, I want a guy with 300-yard upside, and certainly Drew Brees brings that to the table. So if the ownership is low enough, if the projected ownership is low enough, he's a guy that I want on my GPP rosters this weekend because the team total is high and all the pieces are there for a big game. As far as cash game quarterbacks, I'm going to sound like a broken record maybe throughout the show, but I think Jay Cutler is a guy that I'll be looking at this week. He's really cheap. He's $7,000 on FanDuel, $5,300 on DraftKings, which is entirely too cheap. And if we look at what he's done this year, yeah, he hasn't had great numbers, but he's gone up against Houston, Philadelphia, and Minnesota. These are three of the better defenses in the league. And this is probably the healthiest that the Bears have been all season in terms of their skill positions. So I think that this is a great spot for him, and he's cheap enough that I feel pretty safe going with him against the Tampa Bay defense that I think is giving up the fourth most fantasy points to the quarterback position this season.
Yes, on that Tampa note, again, only Colin Kaepernick and Derek Anderson account for the two performances where the opposing team did not pass for multiple touchdowns against them. And that includes Case Keenum and Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian teaming up. And then you always have the potential for that 500-yard game like what Derek Carr was able to put up against them. I also want to bring up Eli Manning. And I know anybody who's ever counted on Eli Manning for anything is burnt. But prime time against Cincinnati, and except, again, Kevin Hogan and Cody Kessler, okay, they didn't pass for a touchdown against Cincinnati. Dak Prescott only passed for one, but he only threw the ball 24 times. Ryan Tannehill only threw the ball 25 times. And that was back before Miami's offense had an identity. Every other game, there's been at least two passing touchdowns against Cincinnati. Of course, last time out, 458 from Kirk Cousins. Ben Roethlisberger threw for 3 against them in the rain. Tom Brady, Trevor Siemian threw for 4 against them and 312 yards. So Eli Manning was hot last week. There was a fourth down play that could have been another 30 or 40-yard touchdown to Odell Beckham that he just missed. I know you don't, burn me twice. Shame on me. Shame on me, I guess, if I go back to Eli Manning. But it's an interesting one there. Let's go to running backs. Same lenses as we go through the positions. Devin, chalk, cash versus GPP, maybe a fade. What do you have at running back this week, Devin?
Yeah, there's two that I think that stand out right off the bat, and that's David Johnson and Melvin Gordon. David Johnson going up against San Francisco, which we mention every week. Start running backs against San Francisco. It's just basically a free play. The other one is Melvin Gordon. Somebody mentioned earlier that he scores on 42% of their touchdowns. He's catching the ball more than what we've seen in the past, which is a great thing for either PPR or even half-point PPR leagues. So those are the two at the top that I'm starting with. I think they're the safest among all the running backs, but then I'll turn it over to the rest of the guys to mention some of the other plays.
Sure. And, of course, if you want to go Park Place and Boardwalk and get David Johnson and Melvin Gordon this week, that's why a quarterback like Jay Cutler becomes more attractive, or maybe a quarterback like Carson. Once we talk about, as we step through, we think about how we piece these together. Phil, how could we piece together a lineup where we're not going with Park Place and Boardwalk at running back? What do you got, Phil?
Well, I might have to hold up the red black eye Joe on myself here because I don't know how much I buy into this, but
That's a good lead in.
I was looking at Dodds' early projections earlier today, and one thing that I like to do, and actually it's the topic of my article this week, is calculating projected touches per dollar. And Dodds has LeGarrette Blount at 20 touches, and it's 20 carries, obviously, for him. And if you think about it, the game script does set up as a blunt game. I think the spread is 7.5. New England is set to score 28 points. That's 4 touchdowns. Blunt leads the league in rushing touchdowns. So if we trust in that script, it definitely looks like a blunt game. Nobody's going to be on him because it's Seattle, and everybody is kind of predisposed to avoid that defense. Plus, nobody likes playing New England backs because it's so incredibly hard to decipher what's going to happen from week to week. But as far as that whole dollar per touch thing goes, there was no running back on FanDuel less expensive than Blunt's 6,400. That is projected for as many touches. So I think if you're chasing volume, you want to do it in a good offense. The Patriots obviously have it, and nobody's going to be on Blunt. So he's my GPP guy, even though I don't know how much exposure I'm actually going to end up with when I start building lineups.
And again, I got to mention, we look at the last 3 weeks, 30 running back carries against Seattle from Buffalo, 34 by New Orleans, and 35. Granted, it was a 5-quarter game, but teams are running and getting to those high volumes. So 20 may end up being conservative when we look back on this one, if it goes the way it has. The last 3, Austin, round us up here at the running back positions again, looking a little lower on the eye chart than our obsessions of David Johnson and Melvin Gordon this week.
Sure. I think Darren Sproles is going to be a very popular pick this week, especially on full-point PPR sites. Coach came out this week and said, I guess Darren is our number 1 back right now. And he's got 14 carries in each of the last 2 games. And Atlanta has really struggled against those pass-catching running backs. And so I think he's going to be very highly owned, reasonable cash game play there. I think that everyone's going to be on Melvin Gordon. I think it's worthwhile to not forget about Jay Ajayi and GPPs against San Diego. Like you said, I think this is going to be running backs bashing each other in the face. I also like, if you're playing the Monday night slate, I'm looking at Jeremy Hill at only 6,100 on FanDuel. He's outscored Giovanni Bernard in back-to-back games, and over the last 5 games, the Giants have looked a little bit weak in rush defense. They've allowed running backs to outscore by about 50% of what they usually do. And they've allowed touchdowns to Matthews and Barner in the Philly game, and then Terrence West, a couple of touchdowns, McKinnon and Asiata. They've allowed a lot of touchdowns in the last 5 games. So I could see Jeremy Hill in a game script where Cincinnati should be in control of this late in the game, where Hill could get rushing touchdowns, 1 or 2 this week. I like Hill as a GPP play.
I've got a GPP play. Chris Ivory. Yes, living together
Absolutely.
in perfect harmony. Look, Houston's going to encourage the opponent to run the ball anyway. And under the radar, we watch these offensive coordinator changes. Nathaniel Hackett, whenever we go into the season thinking Jacksonville wants to run the ball, they sign Chris Ivory. This is their new identity. It hasn't clicked. Well, against Indianapolis, but everything works against Indianapolis except for Aaron Rodgers for 3 quarters. But last week, Chris Ivory looked like the guy they paid whatever $20-some million to. He was fast, he was agile, and if were it not for a fumble at the goal line, he would have had a big week. And I think that Brock Osweiler is not going to run away from Jacksonville and make them abandon the run. So this could be a big Chris Ivory week. Let's go to wide receiver. Jeff.
Before we do.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
How do we not mention Devin Booker? I mean, the Saints are terrible against the run. I think that, even as a GPP play, I think that Devin Booker has to be mentioned.
Well, and I think what we're watching are the variables of Capri Bibbs. How big is his role? I'll say that Cecil's hinting. Cecil can't specifically talk about what he sees at practice in terms of first-team snaps, but he's hinting the Bibbs increased role might not be as much as we expect. I will just say this, and I think that you're right in GPP because it could be big for Booker. I'm sensing offensive meltdown for Denver. I'm sensing, again, their defense not being able to off the field. Trevor Siemian may be missing on too many third downs, all leading into the Paxton Lynch show coming out of their Week 11 bye. All right, Jeff, wide receiver. Go ahead.
One key thing real quick is that Booker was limited in practice, and Bibbs becomes a must play if Booker is out.
Ooh, should be interesting to see the practice reports leading up to that. Now we turn the page to wide receivers, Jeff. Who's going to put on a show at wide receiver this week?
wide receiver is going to be interesting. Again, we don't have Oakland, Indy, or Buffalo to pick on. So digging deeper, I think San Francisco is a great GPP play. I'm sorry, against San Francisco, it's a great PPP play. So everybody's looking at David Johnson as the cash money guy, but Carson Palmer, the J.J. Nelson, who's nobody's going to talk about because he was on a bye last week, could score a touchdown, and Fitzgerald as well. So I think that both those guys are in play. But the top wide receiver, I like Jordan Matthews for Philadelphia. I think, again, you got to get the points somewhere for Philadelphia against Atlanta. Atlanta's given up 14 touchdowns to wide receivers. So that's a great play to me. I also like, as John mentioned about Jay Cutler, both wide receivers for the Bears. Like Meredith and Jeffrey, they look really good this week against Tampa Bay. You can't stop anybody. Those are some of my top plays this week.
John, let's shake the bushes for some more wide receivers. Again, maybe not so much matchup based, but there's certainly some opportunity based wide receivers. And of course, we always want to talk about those chalk plays and potential fades. What do we got this week, John?
Well, if we're talking about opportunity, we have to talk about Mike Evans, right? This guy is just all over the field, getting targets galore, likely to break the record, barring anything unforeseen. He's always in play. We probably don't have to belabor that point. A guy I'll be looking at this week in GPPs, maybe a little bit off the beaten path, is Sterling Shepard. He's really looked good this season, and he's going against a Cincinnati Bengals secondary in Dre Kirkpatrick and who's the other fellow I'm trying to remember right now?
Darquez Denard.
I'm thinking of Pac-Man Jones.
Oh, well.
Whose better days are behind him. These guys are ranking in the bottom of the league on Pro Football Focus in terms of their ability to cover. And everybody's going to be on Odell Beckham, and for good reason. I think Devin will tell you I love Odell Beckham about as much as anybody. But this is a great week to pivot off of him and go with Sterling Shepard, who's only 4,500 on DraftKings, and he certainly has decent upside in this, especially if we think that the Bengals are going to be able to keep moving the ball against the Giants.
Yeah, well, we saw that London game, the rare offensive show from London. The Giants and Bengals are definitely shaping up to being that kind of game this week. What kinds of things are you seeing shaping up at wide receiver this week, Devin?
Yeah, Odell Beckham is on my do not play list ever since John and I met when he lost me a live final win, but we're not going to go back into that dark memory. Jordy Nelson is a guy who I'm targeting a lot this week. He finally, we talked about it last week and he delivered again, but he's a guy who finally starts looking to look healthy. Didn't look 100%. There were talks about, is he ever going to recover? He's starting to become that player that we saw a few years ago where he was just taking the top off the defense and connecting on deep balls with Aaron Rodgers. The Packers just refuse to run the ball in any of these games, and they're throwing in a clip that Aaron Rodgers has never thrown at before. So I think stacking Rodgers and Jordy is a good play this week.
I'll sprinkle in some GPP ideas here. Just some thoughts. Chris Conley and Tyreek Hill, if Alex Smith has some nerve to throw down field against Carolina. We mentioned Tyrell Williams, Dontrell Inman should get some consideration there too with San Diego and Phillip Rivers. And then just because it's the Jets, it's Todd Gurley limited or maybe out. Case Keenum's going to do his barnstorming act. Brian Quick, Kenny Britt. We've seen the Jets give up Sammy Coates was a good play the week he played the Jets. So downfield receivers, never know when they're going to hit. Let's move to tight ends. And again, as Jeff mentioned, Detroit's on a bye, so we can't just target Detroit this week, Phil. Who can we target at tight end, Phil?
Lance Kendricks is kind of interesting, isn't he? 29 targets over his past 3 games. We've seen the Jets struggle, against good tight ends. Travis Kelce got the best of them. So did Jimmy Graham. But, really just the whole back end of that defense is terrible. I expect and Vegas expects LA to be trailing, so Keenum should be passing, like you said. And Kendricks has been involved, so he's cheap. And you could slot him in. I mean, I don't mind running him out there. in GPPs, and he might even be because his ceiling isn't super high. In a full PPR, I wouldn't mind using him in cash games.
Stepping through another level tight end, Austin. And Lance Kendricks, I think, has at least 5 catches in 4 of the last 5 games. So he is coming on. Who else is coming on? Who can come through for us this week at tight end, Austin?
At the top end, I think that a lot of people are going to be on Jimmy Graham because he's coming off of some big games. If I were Bill Belichick, that's the guy I would scheme against. So I'm a little bit off of Jimmy Graham this week, and I would pivot over to Jordan Reed instead. The Minnesota defense has been showing signs of weakness over the past 5 weeks, and they're kind of a neutral matchup for tight ends. And Jordan Reed is a big part of that offense. I'm going a little bit cheaper. I like to consider Will Tye possibly on the Monday night slate against Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati has been struggling against the tight end quite a bit with Victor Cruz likely out of this game. I think Will Tye is a guy who pick up some of that slack.
Rounding out our tight end takes, Jeff, what do we see at tight end? Is this where you're going to tell us to play Zach Ertz against Atlanta? Are we going to go hometown Philly with this one?
Yes. Absolutely. We are going to play Zach Ertz this week. There's no question about it. But I'm also going to play, I think Travis Kelce's a play as well. I think both those guys, you lost your top 3 choices. Detroit, you lost Indianapolis, you lost Cleveland. Those aren't on the slate. You got to go deeper. So the 4th and 5th teams are Atlanta and Carolina. So that tells you Kelce, who's very capable, and it also tells you Zach Ertz. So I think both those guys, and if you're going to throw a dart, maybe Burton. But I don't think he's on the field enough. But I think that Ertz is going to see a lot of targets, and I like the Will Tye play as well. I think I really like the tight ends this week. I think a lot of people are going to scramble at tight ends. They're going to go with the big names, but Ertz and Kelce are going to win you some tournaments this week.
I'll toss 2 more out there before we move on to defensive kickers. Zach Miller. And he had that chemistry with Brian Hoyer, and then he comes out with okay, Jeff. This is where we get to the debate, because I really wanted to bring up Zach Miller to plug Matt Waldman's top 10, where he just detailed how Tampa Bay has weakness in that secondary and in the middle of the field. But why thumbs down on Miller?
Tampa Bay's been pretty good against the tight end. They've given up a lot of yards to the wide receivers, but not the tight end. So the way to pick on them is outside, not in the middle. And I don't think Zach Miller's going to be the option. And I don't think he's the apple of the eye of Jay Cutler.
They've only played 1 tight end all season, Jeff. Here's the list of tight ends they played: Austin Hooper and Toloyo, who actually both had a touchdown.
And Josh Perkins dropped a touchdown in that game. All 3 of them could have scored.
And Rivera the week prior had a touchdown. Before that, it was Vance McDonald, Garrett Selleck, so they didn't do anything. Greg Olsen in week 5, 9 catches, 181 yards. And then before that, it was Herman, Fells, and Tamian Hooper. I don't think they faced a good tight end all season.
I just don't see a lineup where I would put him in, because unless I'm doing a super stack, in a cash game, I'm going to use Kelce or I'm going to use Ertz.
While I'm antagonizing you, I'm going to ask you why you like Zach Ertz, who hasn't had more than 3 targets since week 1.
Because Atlanta's one of the worst defenses against tight ends.
But if
they gave up 1 touchdown to Brate last week. They almost gave up 2.
Do we really believe that Ertz is integrated into that offense enough to trust him in this format?
He certainly has more reliable hands than anybody except Jordan Matthews.
Fair enough. I'm just giving the other angle here.
Well, here's Exhibit A for the Zach Ertz case. Kobe Fleener had a big game against Atlanta this year. If Kobe Fleener can do it, then Zach Ertz to do it. I want to plug Martellus Bennett too, just because Seattle, again, there's been some moments with Toilolo, with Lance Kendricks, where they kind of lose track of tight ends. There's that game last year with Marcus Wheaton for the Steelers. But in that secondary, they can lose track of players. I think they're going to be paying more attention to Rob Gronkowski than Bennett. Bennett will be a little bit healthier coming out of the bye. His ankle rested a little bit. Okay, we all want to talk about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, but we take kicker and defense takes on a volunteer basis. So who wants to volunteer to come in front of the class and talk about defensive kickers? Okay, we'll start with Devin.
Yeah, there's 2 actually in the same game. One is cheaper than the other. The 2 teams that have given up the most goals so far this season are the Eagles and the Falcons. And this projects to be a very high-scoring game. So I like both Matt Bryant and drawing a blank here. the Eagles kicker.
Sturgis.
Caleb Sturgis.
I was about to say Cody Parkey, but he's no longer there.
The Brown, yeah.
I was like, that's not right. So those two are the two of the top plays this week. One other guy that I like, and I'll let Jeff get to the obvious one because I know he's ready to go. Josh Lambo at home is a guy who I've been targeting a lot this year. It seems like at home he's very comfortable in that perfect San Diego weather.
Jeff, you're chomping at the bit, so let's let you out of the chute. Did I get that right? See, so I always do rodeo references and I do it wrong. What do you got, Jeff?
I love talking kickers because the points count, so they all count. So I think the number one guy for me is Catanzaro for Arizona. He's cheap. He's at 4,500. You don't get any cheaper. You got the most points, and he's going to. So maybe you might say he's going to get a lot of extra points rather than field goals, but he's going to get plenty of points. I also like the Green Bay kicker for Mason Crosby this week. I think that he's going to get a lot of points this week because Green Bay. I look for teams that are going to expect to score a lot of points and also going to struggle in the red zone. So that normally translates well there. Sturgis is a great call too because he's been very consistent. He missed one field goal last week because it was blocked. But Lambo and also Lutz is also a good positive in a high scoring game for New Orleans. But I'm not paying up for Matt Bryant for $5,100. I'm not doing that.
So, Austin, I know you've been waiting patiently as you're the third volunteer. What do you have kickers and defenses this week?
I feel like the game script sets up really well for Catanzaro, but I'm fading him this week. He's only made 8 field goals all season, and he's really struggled. I'd rather pay the same price for Lutz instead. But I think that's something to be careful of, even though all the indicators seem to point towards him as a great value.
And if there's a game-winning field goal, he will miss it.
Yeah, it's guaranteed.
That's true. Yeah.
Arizona's the chalk defense this week. They're going to be super crazy high owned. I feel comfortable playing them in cash, no problem. I think that if you're going to look at another defense, especially one that's maybe only on the 1 p.m. slate, if you're playing that slate, I would look towards, we mentioned all the injuries and stuff Kansas City's dealing with. I would play Carolina against Kansas City. I would also consider the Jets against the Rams here in a very low-scoring game. Those are the two I'm looking at on the 1 p.m. slate.
It's funny. We're in concert here. I was going to bring up Carolina. Carolina's had a couple of feeding frenzy games at home this year. If they could just get out to a lead and force Alex Smith to have to open up things. I actually like the Los Angeles side of Los Angeles and the Jets. Whether it's a banged up Ryan Fitzpatrick or they knock Ryan Fitzpatrick out, we see Bryce Petty. And LA came out roaring out of the bye last week defensively, and they've also had some of their bigger defensive games on the road this year. The problem with the Jets is just statistically they haven't been producing much in the way of sacks and takeaways, although they've been playing good defense at times. Now we're stepping through to one of our favorite subjects every week, stacks upon stacks upon stacks. John, what stacks can make us stacks of cash this week?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go against some of the guys on the power grid today. I don't think they're going to be drastically hating this pick, but I know a few of them expressed maybe this isn't the right move. But I really like Matt Ryan and Julio Jones this week. I don't think that this Eagles secondary is as good as they look on paper. When they played an elite wide receiver one, they've been burned pretty good this season consistently. They've played 3. Antonio Brown beat them in that disaster of a game for the Steelers earlier this year. I think he ended up with somewhere north of 12 catches and 140 yards. And then after that, it's not in front of me right now, but obviously last week we know Odell Beckham scored a pair of touchdowns, and there was one more elite wide receiver whose name escapes me right now, but certainly he had a big game as well. And if we look,
Bryant had a pretty big game against.
There you go. Des Bryant is who was on my mind, and so this week I would put Julio Jones in that company, and he should get about 70% of his snaps against Nolan Carroll or Leotis McKelvin, who last week gave up 3 touchdowns in coverage, 2 to Odell Beckham and 1 to Roger Lewis. He was later replaced by Jalen Mills, who was actually the absolute worst-ranked cornerback in the league. These guys, Carroll and McKelvin, are giving up 16 and 18 yards per completion, which is insanely high. And we already know that Julio Jones carries a big ADOTS, average depth of target. These could be some big plays, and he could put up monstrous numbers that we've already seen him do this season. And if people are going to avoid him this week because of a combination of his salary and the supposed bad matchup, I want a piece of that because I know he brings a lot of upside to the table.
Again, that bad matchup producing 4, could have been more passing touchdowns and a lot of breakdowns in the secondary. Devin, where are the breakdowns? Where can we put players together to create stacks with our stacks?
Yeah, I think when I look at stacks, I'm typically looking at under the radar type guys. I like the Matt Ryan stack. I mentioned the Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson stack, but that's going to be a little bit too popular for it to be my top stack this week. I think the one stack that I really like this week, and not a lot of people have been talking about it, is Andy Dalton and AJ Green. The Bengals are going to have to throw the ball, and we've talked about them being favored in this game and potentially Jeremy Hill being a good play. But to get to that point where Jeremy Hill becomes a good play, Dalton is going to have to throw, and he's going to have to throw quite a bit because I think it's going to be a shootout game. I think Eli Manning and Odell Beckham are also good plays. So I think both sides of this game in what should be a shootout. If you're playing the Monday night slate, it's always good. It's always fun to have 2 remaining bullets left in the lineup, if you will. So target that Monday night slate if you're playing it.
Dalton to Eifert, for that matter.
Yes, Eifert.
So everyone's forgetting how he's that touchdown magnet. Where are the connections, Phil, that are going to be point magnets when we're looking for stacks this week?
I guess I'll be the guy that touts the Ben at home narrative. It was the first thing that stood out to me when I looked at the slate. 50-point over under. I guess the opposite end of the argument would be that the Cowboys are going to look to control time of possession, and there might not be as many plays, as many opportunities. But when you are looking at Ben and looking at stacking him with his receivers, you're not looking for quantity so much as you're looking for those big plays, downfield strikes to Brown, and even to Sammy Coates, dare I say it. But it wouldn't shock me to see it happen in this game. The Dallas secondary is a little bit banged up. So I'm in on them. I love the Ben Brown stack. And then one other one, which I guess would be a non-traditional stack real quick, would just be putting Evans and Alshon in the same lineup. I could picture those 2 guys just kind of going back and forth.
Austin, who's going to make beautiful music for us this week? Give us some players that the connection will connect us to great finishes in DFS this week.
Sure. I think that there's a handful of quarterbacks that you could look at naked stacks. I think that some of these guys like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady set up more to be like, hey, they're going to spread the ball around. You could play them without stacking them in a GPP potentially. I like, though, going for some lesser-owned guys in stacks and playing Phillip Rivers plus Tyrell Williams. It looks like Travis Benjamin is going to miss this game, which hopefully funnels a little bit more to Williams. You could also stack him with Antonio Gates as another play there against a Miami secondary that's been suspect. Another stack that I like is Breeze and Michael Thomas. I think that the Denver name is still scaring people off of playing Breeze a little bit. He'll probably be fairly medium owned, but I think people will come off of him enough that I'll get some exposure to that stack as well.
And bringing us home, putting the cherry on top of all the stacks, Jeff, show us who's the cherry on top of our sundae.
I got 3 stacks that haven't really been touched on. I think the Philadelphia stack is going to be talked about a lot because there's a lot of value there. I'm still driving the Ertz train this week. I was alone on the Pitta train. I'll be alone on the Ertz train. We'll see where it goes. But I'll tell you a different way to play the Philly stack, and this is not a normal way, but it's going to be very low owned. Darren Sproles in the Philadelphia defense. The guy can return the kick at any given time. He almost did it last week. He just tripped out of bounds. But Sproles going to have a good game alone, and he could return a touchdown. And Atlanta, they could throw a pick six. I mean, Philadelphia they're going to throw the kitchen sink at Matt Ryan this week. So I do like Atlanta to break some touchdowns, but the defense is going to get some plays too. The third one I'll mention, bringing it full circle, back to Marcus Mariota. People, if you're going to play Mariota, you're going to look to Delanie Walker. I'm actually going to look at Rashard Matthews. He's had 21 targets the last 3 weeks. He had 6 catches, 63 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week. I think that's going to be a very unowned stack. It's probably less than 1% total combined, and they could very easily hit 4 times value on DraftKings, 3 times on FanDuel.
And I just want to mention these two because I think that they mesh well with the Boardwalk Park Place. If you're going for getting both Melvin Gordon and David Johnson in your lineup, how about? Whoa! There goes my camera because my cat is trying to get in.
Cat attack.
Yeah,
Your cat liked our show, dude. You told me that your cat loved our show.
Well, and it's funny, too, because this used to be something with our live audibles when Matt Waldman's cat, Zook, would always attack when we were talking about a quarterback that was prone to get a lot of sacks. So going with the Park Place and Boardwalk, I don't know what this means. I don't know if you're superstitious or not. Trevor Siemian and Emmanuel Sanders or Demaryius Thomas. We did see in that game against Cincinnati that he had those 4 touchdowns and both of those receivers lit it up. It is New Orleans. And again, these kind of getting Trevor Siemian in would help save some cash. And I would also potentially look at, if you want to go really cheap, this is the one that's the Boardwalk Park Play specials. We've talked about this a couple of times. Case Keenum and Kenny Britt, or Case Keenum and Brian Quick in a GPP. It could work out, it allows you to get all the chalk plays you want. And speaking of chalk plays, getting everything that you want, Jeff, I'll start with you. Our parting thoughts as we go off into the Week 10 sunset.
I think there's a lot of for cash. I think you definitely want to stick with the chalk at the top running back. So you got plenty to stack around. It's a good GPP week because there's plenty of stacks to build around that. But I think for cash plays, I think that there's going to be a lot of big names out there. I think Arizona is definitely going to be the way to go. You're going to make your break your week this week, just like last week with your wide receivers.
Yeah, Arizona. And it's funny because you can go Palmer, you can go David Johnson, you could go Fitzgerald, Nelson, John Brown, and the Arizona defense. So that's going to be one of the more crucial choices that you make. Austin, what are your parting thoughts for Week 10?
I like a week like this where I feel like there isn't like a slam dunk set of chalk plays that everybody is going to have in their lineup. There's a handful of guys at the top of the salary cap, but that's the way it's going to be most weeks. So I get excited about playing multiple slates and spreading my exposure around just enough that, if the kind of top guys don't hit, I've got enough exposure to other players in other slates that it balances out my cash game success. So I would say don't get too honed in on just playing one slate. Use that variety to help you get exposure to other players you might not otherwise get exposure to.
John, you had a positive reaction to that take. Certainly the herd, it's not that difficult to anticipate where the herd is going to go this week, but then that does create some opportunities. What is coming to your mind when you give us our last bit of wisdom for Week 10?
Yeah, I like that. I like that take to spread your exposure around, especially when there isn't a whole lot of clear-cut options outside of David Johnson in terms of you must play. Last week we had 3 guys who I think everybody had, and that really limited your ability to diversify your rosters. And this week, that's not the case. The thing I'll point out this week, from a GPP perspective, looking at these Vegas lines, there's only 2 games that are really far apart. And, one of them is the David Johnson game against San Francisco, and he's going to be highly owned. But outside of that, I think your GPPs will be won and lost with your secondary running back. You need to nail that guy who's going to have 2 touchdowns and 100-plus yards. And if you do that, you're going to be set up for high finishes in GPPs. And along that way, I write my tips and picks article as DK centric, and for DraftKings this week, they have it's kind of crazy. They have $10 million worth of GPPs this week, and they have them at different buy-in prices. And I'm I'm very conscientious of recommending GPPs to folks because over long term they're tough to win. But this week, the way that those are spread out, the pay distribution is really nice, and there are different buy-ins. As I said, there's $4, $44, and $444 for you high rollers, all of which have pretty deep payouts. So if you're going to do that, certainly DraftKings has that, and of course, FanDuel is always an option. As Sig's already pointed out, you got the Brandon Marshall. Go to the Brooklyn game, sit beside him, let him buy you a beer. You can probably drink his too, is my guess. So you'll be double fisting. And, of course, they have the Sunday Million, which is $200,000 to first place. And that's always a great tournament to play. And so this week you nailed that running back number 2, and I think you're going to be in a good spot for a high finish in GPPs.
Yeah, watch out for Chris Ivory. And Brandon Marshall can help you get your life together too. I mean, he knows a thing or two about that. So he's always, anytime he's on publicly talking about these things, he's a deep thinker. He's introspective. Last bit of introspection on week 10, Devin, and also take us into the sunset with some thoughts. Hoops, guys, it's happening.
Yeah, we're almost a month in now. It's kind of crazy. Hoopsguys.com, we have projections every day, our interactive value charts that most people have come accustomed to. If you're not using them for football, you should start using them for football, and you should also check us out on Hoopsguys for basketball. We have a number of articles every day, depending on the slate size. Go out. We're free for another couple weeks up until Thanksgiving, so 2 weeks from today. So if you haven't checked us out, please do. Give us your feedback and give us your thoughts, and we look forward to interacting with you.
Yeah, it's like putting nuts away for the winter, building that NBA interest, because I'm sorry to say, football's not going to be with us forever. There will be some time without football coming up. But the NBA kicks in for us. Hoops, guys. We got your back. Thanks to everybody for being polite. Substitute teachers here, Cecil Lammy, of course, on assignment. He'll be back. Everybody was polite except my cat, which is typical. Don't get a Siamese cat. They're crazy. I mean, unless you like crazy. But I know you like everything we give you here at footballguys.com. Thanks for this opportunity to talk with all of these wise minds, and for you out there for giving us your time here on the Power Grid. Good luck in Week 10. That feeling, like the blood running cold, like, what's happening? Why are all these people all of a sudden in our hangout? Yeah. Be careful what you tweet out there.